Ask any former yearbook staffer and they'll tell you the most important thing about yearbook is getting good pictures. Without good pictures, it doesn't matter the quality of your story. People aren't going to even want to look at it because the first thing that will catch their eye, the pictures. This particular lecture is going to talk about 2 different targets that will help you become a much better photographer. So our first target here is P11, and this is about visual storytelling. And visual storytelling involves a couple of different things that you can do to make sure you're getting good content in your pictures, including looking at things like interaction, body language, facial expression, and environment. This is really going to force us to avoid what is commonly known as cheese photos, and I'll show some examples of those. During the 4, I need to see that you can consistently apply these elements and that your photos are unique and advanced. And that will come into play in considering that you'll want to pair them with P12 elements. I want to see both P11 and P12 at play in all of your pictures to really earn that 4 for both. P12 is about your composition of your pictures, not just what you take your pictures of, but how you actually take those pictures. And that can be the actual picture you snap. It can also be the picture that you create through effective cropping. And there are quite a few tricks to try in relation to composition that I'll be going over for you. So we'll start with visual storytelling. This is the what you take your picture of, the content of your picture. And all visual storytelling really means is that you're capturing not only the action, but also the emotion of the subject, okay? Now there are 4 different methods that are recommended for capturing visual storytelling. Interaction, looking for moments where people are interacting together. You can see in this example, we've got a large group of people interacting. They're holding hands. I can actually kind of envision them chanting Kumbaya, I don't know. But clearly they are connected in some way, and that makes this a very interesting picture for that reason. You can also capture body language. Take a look at this sports picture. We can tell that something hasn't quite gone to plan because of the body language of our player here on the ground, and that makes it an interesting picture. Now, ideally we'll be, getting happier pictures, but it is a good example of body language at least. Expression is considering the very close look at the people's faces that we're capturing, and it's not just people smiling at us, it's the people engaged in what they're doing, like this child here who is very cheerfully engaged in the eating of her ice cream. And then there's environment too. This will probably be the least used method of visual storytelling for us this year simply because it relates to things rather than people, and our job in capturing pictures for the yearbook is going to be capturing primarily the people of our school. What is not visual storytelling? Cheese photos. Cheese photos are posed pictures, like this team picture here, and that's not to say that there's not a place for team pictures and cheese photos in the yearbook, but we need to use them very carefully. This particular team picture would be featured on a team picture page, and that's primarily where we want to see cheese photos in our yearbook. Selfies are often not visual storytelling as well. It's people smiling for the camera, and you don't really get much of a view of anything aside from their heads and maybe a little bit of where they are, which is generally what they're trying to capture. So as amusing as the selfies might be, and as easy as it is to get cheese photos, we do want to avoid them. This is going to be a challenge for you, and I'll tell you why. You're going to find that when you go to take pictures, especially if it's not a sporting event, people are going to smile at you. That's just a natural reaction when people see a camera. They're going to want to turn and smile for you, or they're going to want to make faces. Your job as a photographer will be to capture the moments when they're not doing that, when they're actually fully engaged. You can tell them, hey, just do what you were doing. I'm not here to get smiling shots. I'm here to get action shots. That might help. Otherwise, you might have to get a little sneaky, and that's okay too. Sports are going to be easier because people are generally quite engaged in their games as they're playing. So at least you've got that on your side. But yeah, do avoid those posed pictures. It will be a challenge, but do prevail, and you'll get those pictures you need. Some tricks to try to help better develop your visual storytelling: research your subject, okay? Know what you're going into before you get there. I'll take a case in point here of teaching, right? If you're going to cover Mr. Klingbeil's science class, know what exactly you're going to see. Talk to Mr. Klingbeil, find out what his students are going to be doing that day. Then I'd recommend visiting too. If Mr. Klingbeil tells you, for instance, that they're going to be testing bridges out in the commons, you'll want to know where exactly they're going to be in the commons, what the setup will be, where you need to be to get the best picture. So visit ahead of time. Observe before you shoot. Don't pull out the camera right away when you get there. Watch to see what's going on, and then find your perfect spot to take your pictures and get your pictures. I'd also recommend that you stay in location. Don't stay for 5 minutes and think you've got the perfect pictures and be done. If you can, stay a little bit longer. You never know what new opportunities might present themselves to get some good pictures, okay? Now we're into P12, photo composition. Photo composition is just the arrangement of elements in your photo. It's how things are put together in the picture. You should always have a center of interest, which we'll talk about next. And then there are a bunch of other techniques that are listed here that you can choose and pick and choose. You're not going to be able to feature every single one of them in a picture. You might have a couple of them at a time, but they're just different methods of developing interest in the composition of your pictures. So a center of interest should be in every picture. We should know exactly what the focus of that picture is. So that should always be clear. What are you taking the picture of? And for the most part, that's pretty easy to do. Where we tend to get into trouble is if you have a lot going on in a picture and it's different things going on. If you've got someone presenting and you've got a bunch of people watching in the audience and then there's like another activity going on off to the side, where am I supposed to look? So for the most part, pretty easy, but do be aware if you've got a lot going on where you're taking pictures, you'll want to zoom in on one particular activity at a time to try and get the best pictures and the best center of interest. Our lovely cat friend here illustrates that he is, in fact, the center of interest. Rule of thirds is another good application for composition of your photographs. Basically, this is applying a grid to your pictures. The center of interest will ideally be on one of the thirds lines right here in the center. You can see they're all circled here, right? So you want your center of interest to be touching one of those. And it doesn't necessarily need to take up the entire center box. It can be a little bit off-sided as long as there's something else going on over here. So we have, in this particular example, if you want to draw those lines on there, poorly, I'm sorry. We've got the cat's eyes, really our main center of interest, drawing us into his little face, and they're centered on this particular conjunction here. But we also have his whiskers and his paw over here to keep us interested in the particular picture that we're looking at. Do you see a theme yet? Kitties! Balance is another technique that you might try. When you're using rule of thirds, as I just mentioned, you want to be sure to avoid empty or unbalanced space on the opposite side of the center of interest. In the previous picture, we had more parts of the cat visible, and that allowed us to have a balanced picture. Here, we actually have an unbalanced picture. We've got our kitty here, and he is on the thirds line, right? But notice this whole side, or this whole third of the picture is basically empty, so that makes it an unbalanced picture. Simplicity is a technique that allows us to have a very quiet background, a very uniform background. Here, we just have the grass background, so we're basically relying just on the color. And this helps draw us into our center of focus. So if you have a very interesting center of focus, you can rely on simplicity in the background to help make that center stand out. It can be a bit of a challenge in a school environment, but not impossible. Framing is a pretty cool technique. It's allowing objects that are in the foreground or closer to us to frame the center of interest, okay? And they've got to be closer, right? The frame is going to be closer to us, just as you would look at a picture frame. The picture frame is closer. So here we have our kitty in the background, and he's our center of focus. But notice how we've got the grass, and it's a little unfocused to help us understand this. That is just framing him, and that makes for a very interesting picture of this cat is about to pounce on us. Leading lines is a very common composition technique that you might employ. It's the use of lines of any type to draw the eye to the center of interest. So here we've got our kitty as our center of interest, and we have the floor tile line leading us into its beautiful face. Okay. You might think about the effect of taking a picture in the hallway and using the line of the lockers to be the leading line, or using a grid line on the gym floor as a leading line. Look for those opportunities. Even tables lined up in a row can be leading line into the center of interest. Pattern is another technique you might try. You can shoot a pattern or a break in the pattern. So you can actually see that break here, right? We've got a pattern of 3 cute sleeping kitties, and then we've got a little break with the 4th one who's tucked in a different way. That can make for very engaging pictures. Viewpoint's a fun one to try. Viewpoint simply means taking your pictures from a higher or lower or a side angle. You are going to have to move yourself to do this. And while you might need to do that for some of the other techniques as well, for viewpoint it's certainly something to try. You'll want to be safe, of course. If you're climbing up on something, make sure that it is sturdy and stable, and try not to be a disruption if you're doing it in a classroom setting. But so you want to consider too going to your location in advance and kind of scoping out where you might get some different viewpoints. Let's say, for instance, you are working on the basketball court. Well, you can certainly take pictures from up in the stands to get a higher viewpoint, but you are going to need to get down in the court, and you'll get different types of pictures depending on where you're located in the court. You can stand directly underneath the hoop, back off of the court, and get some really cool shots of people running down to make a basket, or you can stand off to the side, perhaps get a picture of the players who are sitting on the bench using some leading lines. So play around with that. Try different angles to get the best pictures possible. Depth is another fun one. This means you're capturing interesting elements in the foreground and the background. So here we've got the kitty's paw in the foreground and his big eye that says, "I'm about to get you," in the background. Now, you want to be careful here because, as you see in this example, things tend to get fuzzier. Our camera will want to autofocus on one or the other. So we've got really sharp focus in on the paws, a little bit less so back here. You can play with the different settings on the camera to avoid that if you really want to use depth as one of your composition techniques. All right, those are the different techniques that you might try to use. Of course, remember, visual storytelling comes first. Make sure that what you are taking a picture of is quality and worth taking a picture of, and then consider how you might use different angles and different things in the environment to help create some photographic composition. If all else fails, crop away when you get your pictures back, and make sure that you're creating good center of interest and other techniques as you can.